Thank you, Convener. And I'd like to address the issues of both inequality and preventative spending and link those to each other. Research at the universities of Mannheim, Oxford and Cambridge shows that differences in the prospects of children are identifiable at 3 months of age and become wider with each passing time from 3 months to 11 years and beyond. Professor James Heckman, who I think is well known in Scotland, has made a study of what it is that drives inequality. And he said it is not poverty that drives inequality, it's lack of skills that drives inequality. And he particularly draws attention to what he calls the soft skills, not just reading, writing and arithmetic, but soft skills such as motivation, such as perseverance, such as ability to work with other people in a cooperative manner, such as emotional self-regulation. These soft skills are learned in the home from interaction with the family before children ever go to preschool or kindergarten. And they're heavily influenced by the quality of early parenting. Hence, if we wish to reduce inequality in Scotland over the long term, I would say that the evidence very strongly shows that the way to do that is to improve significantly the quality of very early life experience that those children who are in the more challenged families receive. And that takes me to early years preventative spending. I was at a previous meeting of this finance committee with a slightly different membership when Tom McCabe, when Tom McCabe summed up 9 months of taking evidence on the value of preventative spending in the early years. And he summed it up by saying that they had seen evidence stacked from the floor to the sky that it was the right thing for the Scottish Government to be doing. I'm delighted that since then the Scottish Government has picked up that baton. And the first thing I'd really like to say about the draft budget is an extremely positive one. I think the draft budget is very good and very strong in its repeated commitment to early years preventative spending. We find it in the strategic context, where it talks about investing in activities that will reduce future demand in public services and reduce outcomes, and embed a preventative approach via community planning partnerships. It's stated in the health and well-being chapter, prioritising prevention spend on support for parenting in early years, the £39 million in the early years change fund as the most effective way to address poor health, and the establishment of an early years collaborative, a very important step. It's stated in the education and lifelong learning chapter, where I talk about focus on preventative spend as a strong base for all children to develop, learn, and crucially achieve their potential. And it also talks about prioritising investment in the first years of life and states that that is what will have the biggest impact. In that portfolio, a new £20 million fund is set up, split between early years and early intervention. And they also talk about building on a national parenting strategy. And there are also references in the justice, infrastructure and local government sectors of the budget to the importance of preventative spending in the early years. So I'd just like to say I'm delighted. I work across the United Kingdom, but I'm a Scot, and I'm proud of the fact that Scotland leads the United Kingdom in its commitment to preventative spending, and especially preventative spending in the early years. I think that's wonderful, and I think it's something that we should carry forward in a really effective way, because I think it can be trailblazing. And indeed, Harry Burns tells me it's not only in the rest of the United Kingdom, but many other parts of Europe that are looking to see what Scotland is doing in this respect. I have a concern, however, and that is that we don't realise the scale of investment that's needed to do this effectively. If I look at the £39 million in the early years change fund for the draft budget, and let's take 11 out of the 20 from the education fund and say that's for early years, we're talking about roughly round about £50 million that's being put into moving this agenda forward. That's 1/3 of 1% of the joint health and education budgets. 1/3 of 1%. I've been co-chairing for the last 9 months a study jointly with a senior civil servant in the Department of Education in London and working jointly with the Department for Education and Department of Health, devising a detailed blueprint for how one would put early years prevention policies in place for children from conception to age 2. As a result of the conclusions that we came to about how to do that in practice, I started working with the big lottery, looking at the value of promoting early years preventative spending. And I'm delighted to say that one outcome that has come from that is that the big lottery in England has decided to put £165 million behind backing 4 major pilot studies of putting a blueprint of the type that I'm describing into practice. Now, if I look at the money that the big lottery is putting into that and compare it with what Scotland is putting in, roughly Scotland will be spending in its early years funds equivalent to what the big lottery would be giving to a city like Bradford in England. And I wonder if we really realise the scale that is necessary to make a significant difference, to produce a change. Now, I know the response to asking anywhere for more money to be spent is, of course, where will that money come from? And I'd like to provide a proposed answer to that. And I'm going to do so first by referring to some points made in evidence to you last week by Professor John Kay when he spoke to you. He said that preventative spending would involve spending more money now so that we spend quite a lot less in the future. He said we could make the Scottish population a lot healthier if we spent more on things that would make them healthier and less on actually treating illnesses. He said that the main items in which the Scottish Government spends its money is health and education. And critically and crucially, he said that in the first 7 to 10 years of devolution, there was a substantial increase in spending in health and education without any commensurate improvement in outcomes. Now, that does not surprise me. I was closely involved in Croydon in a project called the Croydon Total Place Study, carried out under the last Labour government. And that was an evaluation of all money spent on early years from any government agency whatsoever, including the HMRC, social justice, criminal justice, any area of spending. They put the entire budgets together and they examined how effective it was. And they came to the conclusion that a great deal of the current spending on health, education and social services was not being spent effectively. They stated that it was very hard to establish a link between investment and outcomes. And they recommended a redesign of spending based on creating solutions rather than delivering services. The biggest criticism of their own operations was the way it was focused on delivering services and not on changing outcomes. They calculated a return of £10 for every pound that they would spend on early years preventative spending by making a change, with the biggest gains coming from doing things differently, and also, they said, a need to stop some services and reduce the costs of others. So I think it is possible to do a great deal more. If we spent in Scotland on an early years change fund at the level that the big lottery is putting money into England on a population equivalent basis for the whole of Scotland, we'd be looking at something that is about 3% of the total education and health budget, including education and social work in local authorities. It doesn't seem to me that 3% is too much to spend. But even if that is too much, and I do not recommend doing that in one go, I think one could spend significantly more than the present sum and run a number of pilots in Scotland of true commitment to early years preventative spend, as the big lottery is going to fund in England, and I'm sure it won't be lost on members of the committee to think of asking if the big lottery in Scotland might make a similar grant to support work here as their partners are doing in England. I think that would be something that would carry early years preventative spending forward to the benefit of reducing inequality, improving education and improving health in Scotland.